One man made a decision that changed the course of human history. He had less than 24 hours to decide if it would work. General Dwight D. Eisenhower didn't know if he would be remembered as the commander who liberated Europe or the general who sent nearly 160,000 men to their deaths on the shores of Normandy. It was the morning of June 5, 1944. The weather was terrible. The seas were rough. Every meteorologist told him to wait, but Eisenhower had already postponed the operation once, originally planned for May 1, then delayed to June 5. Another delay meant waiting until June 11, which meant losing the narrow window of tides and moonlight that made the invasion possible. The invasion had to happen now, or it couldn't happen for weeks. He sat in his command center, smoking cigarette after cigarette, 4 packs a day during the build-up to this moment, and made the call. Okay, we'll go. What he didn't know, at exactly midnight that night, 23,400 Allied paratroopers were already jumping into the darkness over Normandy, scattered across the French countryside in what would become one of history's greatest coordination failures. 1 hour later, at 1 a.m., something else was happening 250 kilometers away. The Allies were faking an invasion at Pas de Calais. German commanders would see the reports and believe this was the real attack. They would keep their best panzer divisions waiting for an invasion that would never come, leaving Normandy defended by undermanned, inexperienced units with captured weapons. By early morning, 3,200 tons of Allied bombs began raining down on German defenses. At 5 a.m., the naval bombardment started, and at 6:30 a.m., the real assault began. Nearly 160,000 troops from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and 11 other Allied nations began pouring onto 5 beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Behind them came over 7,000 naval vessels, a fleet so massive that it seemed to darken the water itself. Approximately 195,700 sailors from 8 different nations manned these ships. This is the story of Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in military history. The operation that seemed impossible, the operation that worked. While paratroopers were still descending through the darkness, the real battle was already being won, not on the beaches but in the minds of Nazi leaders. Operation Bodyguard, the Allied deception campaign, had already accomplished what no amount of firepower could have achieved. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood in his headquarters along the Normandy coast, overseeing the Atlantic Wall defenses. He had built fortifications, positioned troops, and prepared for invasion. But he was missing something crucial. The soldiers he needed most were positioned 250 kilometers away, waiting for an attack that would never come. Above him, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all German forces in Western Europe, had his hands tied by Hitler's own orders. The Panzer Reserves, the mobile strike force that could have crushed the landing in its first hours, were locked in place near Pas de Calais. Hitler and his high command were convinced the Normandy landings were a diversionary attack. The real invasion, they believed, would hit Pas de Calais. They would remain convinced of this for weeks. This wasn't luck, this was strategy. Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, commanding the Naval Expeditionary Force and Operation Neptune, wasn't just orchestrating the largest amphibious invasion in history. He was commanding a deception so complete that it redefined what military strategy meant. General Omar Bradley, leading the 1st U.S. Army, had approximately 7,000 naval vessels under his command, 4,000 landing craft, and 1,200 warships. Every ship, every soldier, every decision was built on the foundation that the Germans would be looking in the wrong direction. General Bernard Law Montgomery coordinated tactical operations. Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory commanded Allied Expeditionary Air Force. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder served as Deputy Supreme Commander. General Miles Dempsey led the British Second Army. Each commander understood the same truth. The deception operation was more powerful than any weapon. German panzer divisions remained immobilized. German commanders waited for an invasion that would never materialize. The Allies had already won the strategic battle before the first shot was fired. What awaited them on the beaches was a German army unprepared, undersupported, and watching the wrong horizon. General Friedrich Dollmann commanded the German 7th Army responsible for defending Normandy, but his forces were spread thin and weakened. The deception had worked perfectly. The numbers alone defy comprehension. Approximately 73,000 American soldiers were landing on beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha. Another 83,115 British and Canadian troops were hitting Gold, Juno, and Sword. Forces from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and 11 other allied nations moved in coordinated waves. Against them stood approximately 50,000 German troops defending the Normandy coast, outnumbered, undersupplied, and watching the wrong horizon. But the real story wasn't on the beaches. It was in the water and in the sky. The naval armada consisted of 6,939 vessels. This wasn't a fleet, it was an ocean of steel. Breaking down the numbers, 1,213 naval combat ships providing firepower, 4,126 landing ships and landing craft carrying troops and equipment, 736 ancillary craft supporting operations, and 864 merchant vessels bringing supplies. Among the landing craft were 932 LSTs, landing ships tank, massive vessels designed to deliver heavy armor directly onto beaches. There were 301 landing ships medium, 1,289 landing craft mechanized, and 600 landing craft infantry. Additionally, 289 escort vessels and 277 minesweepers cleared paths through waters that the Germans had seeded with approximately 4 million mines as part of their Atlantic Wall defenses. The sheer scale of the minesweeping operation alone, coordinating 277 specialized vessels through a minefield of 4 million explosive devices, represented an engineering and tactical achievement that few understood. Approximately 195,700 sailors from 8 different nations manned these vessels. These weren't just American or British sailors. The flotilla included naval personnel from Poland, France, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Greece. Each nation contributed its expertise to the operation. But the invasion wasn't just about naval power. Overhead, approximately 12,000 Allied aircraft provided air support. Of these, 2,395 aircraft and 860 gliders were specifically dedicated to delivering airborne troops to the flanks of the invasion. On D-Day alone, Allied aircraft flew approximately 15,000 sorties. The cost? 113 planes lost. The German response? The Luftwaffe only managed 319 sorties during the entire day, outnumbered 30-1. None of the 113 Allied planes lost fell to Luftwaffe combat. All were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire or operational accidents. The Germans had already lost control of the skies. The logistics that made this possible stretched back months. Approximately 7 million tons of supplies had been shipped to Britain from the United States, including almost 450,000 tons of ammunition alone. Allied planners produced approximately 17 million maps of varying types, including training maps with fake place names, designed to maintain operational security. The scale of preparation was staggering. For every accurate map of Normandy, multiple false maps were created to prevent security breaches. Within just 5 days of landing, the Allies had managed to transport 326,000 troops, 54,000 vehicles, and 104,400 tons of supplies across the beaches. By June 11, approximately 326,000 troops, 54,000 vehicles, and 104,000 tons of supplies had landed. This was no longer an invasion. This was an entire nation crossing the sea. The 50-mile Normandy coastline was divided into 2 zones. The Western Task Force would assault Utah and Omaha beaches, American objectives. The Eastern Task Force would hit Gold, Juno, and Sword, British and Canadian targets. Each beach would tell a different story. Utah Beach, in the American sector, was supposed to be the easy landing. The U.S. 4th Division had embarked from Plymouth, Dartmouth, Torquay, and Exeter on the southern coast of England. They landed southeast of Cherbourg, expecting relatively light German defenses. Among the American forces arriving at Utah were 14 Comanche Indian code talkers, soldiers who would transmit messages in their native Comanche language, a tongue no German linguist could decipher. Their secure communications would prove invaluable in coordinating scattered American forces across the beach. Omaha Beach was different. The U.S. 1st and 29th Divisions had embarked from Falmouth, Fowey, and Plymouth. Their objective lay northwest of Bayeux. The beach itself stretched less than 10 kilometers wide, its sections labeled from west to east: Charlie, Dog Green, Dog White, Dog Red, Easy Green, Easy Red, Fox Green, and Fox Red. Over 34,000 American troops landed here. What they encountered was the heaviest German defenses of any beach. Troops advanced through waist-deep water while German forces positioned in fortified bunkers above fired down on them. Mine-laden beach obstacles and concrete fortifications turned the narrow beach into a killing ground. Approximately 2,400 American casualties fell on Omaha alone, making it the costliest beach of D-Day. The V Corps history provides the breakdown. 2,374 total losses, with the 1st Division losing 1,190 men, the 29th Division losing 743, and Corps troops losing 441. Offshore from Omaha stood Point du Hoc, high ground that dominated the beach below. An American Ranger group scaled the cliffs and took those heights. What they didn't know, the Germans had been using Point du Hoc as a firing position and an artillery spotting post, raining fire down onto the beach. Securing it was essential. The cost was brutal. Gold Beach, 3 miles to the east, was the British 50th Division's objective. They had embarked from Southampton and Portsmouth and landed northeast of Bayeux. Approximately 1,000 British casualties marked this beach. The Canadian 3rd Division crossed from Portsmouth to Juno Beach, also northeast of Bayeux. They encountered well-prepared German defenses. The Canadian contingent included 21,400 infantry troops, and they paid for their advance with 1,200 casualties, approximately 340 killed, 574 wounded, and 47 captured. Sword Beach, the easternmost objective, fell to the British 3rd Division, who embarked from New Haven. Located northeast of Bayeux, Sword Beach saw approximately 1,000 British casualties as well. But the beaches were only one part of the equation. Inland, the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had dropped into the Cotentin Peninsula. The British 6th Airborne Division had landed near the Orne River. Only approximately 15% of these paratroopers landed where they were supposed to. The other 85% scattered across the French countryside, some dropping into German flooded areas where the enemy had deliberately inundated the landscape to create obstacles. Despite this catastrophic coordination failure, these scattered paratroopers achieved their strategic mission. They secured exits from the beaches and prevented German reinforcements from reaching the landing zones. Military success, as it turned out, sometimes depended less on perfect execution than on soldier adaptability and initiative. By the end of June 6, 1944, the Allies had achieved the impossible. The invasion had succeeded. But success came at a cost that would reverberate through history. Over 10,300 Allied soldiers fell on D-Day alone, killed, wounded, or missing. The American casualties broke down to approximately 1,465 deaths, 3,184 wounded, 1,928 missing, and 26 captured. The airborne forces suffered disproportionately, approximately 2,499 airborne casualties. The British lost approximately 3,300 men on D-Day. The Canadians suffered 946 casualties. And the Germans? Their losses on D-Day are estimated between 4,000 and 9,000 killed, though exact figures remain impossible to verify. Entire German units were wiped out, their records simply didn't exist. But D-Day was only the beginning. The Battle of Normandy would continue for 86 days until late August 1944, when the Allies finally crossed the Seine River toward Paris. The true human cost of liberation emerged only when the entire campaign was tallied. American ground forces suffered 135,000 total casualties throughout the Battle of Normandy, 29,000 killed and 106,000 wounded or missing. The British sustained 65,000 total casualties, including 11,000 killed.
The Canadians, despite their smaller contingent, suffered 18,000 total casualties, with 5,000 killed. When the smoke cleared from the entire campaign, the numbers were staggering. Approximately 209,000 Allied casualties in total. But the Germans paid more. Approximately 320,000 German casualties, 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, and 210,000 missing or captured. The civilian toll was devastating. France lost approximately 12,200 civilians during the Battle of Normandy. The landscape itself bore scars. 120,000 Norman buildings destroyed, another 270,000 damaged. Across all nations, Allied, German, and French, the Battle of Normandy claimed 550,200 casualties. Yet, despite this carnage, the operation succeeded because of one critical advantage: the Mulberry harbors. These weren't natural ports, they were artificial harbors, prefabricated and towed across the English Channel. It had taken 55,000 workers more than 6 months to construct the components using 210,000 tons of steel and 1 million tons of concrete. The cost was £40 million, an enormous sum in 1944. Mulberry A, positioned off Omaha Beach, was all but destroyed by a massive storm on June 19, 1944, just 2 weeks after the invasion. But Mulberry B at Armanus in the Gold Beach sector survived. Known as Port Winston, this artificial harbor was designed to operate for 3 months. It operated for 10 months. Through Port Winston, the Allies unloaded approximately 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies. By the end of June, just 4 weeks after the beaches were secured, the Allies had landed more than 850,000 troops, 570,000 tons of supplies, and nearly 150,000 vehicles across the beaches of Normandy. The logistical achievement was unprecedented. Without this supply capability, without Port Winston sustaining the invasion forces, the entire operation would have stalled within weeks. The breakout from the beachhead would have been impossible. The liberation of Western Europe would have been delayed, perhaps for years.
One man had said, "Okay, we'll go," on a rainy morning in June. Millions paid the price, but Europe was free. Historians still argue about the exact numbers. Casualty figures vary between sources. Entire German units were obliterated with no record surviving to document their losses. Stephen Ambrose, one of the most respected historians of D-Day, observed, "No exact figures are possible, either for the number of men landed or for casualties for D-Day alone." The U.S. Army's official history acknowledges the same uncertainty. Gordon Harrison, analyzing decades of conflicting reports, concluded that accurate figures of D-Day losses by unit will likely never be available. History's most pivotal moment remains partially unknowable. Yet, certain facts remain undeniable. The 352nd Infantry Division, a single German unit defending Omaha Beach, inflicted the heaviest casualties of any German formation on D-Day. This division had arrived in Normandy only recently. It was not fully integrated into the Atlantic Wall defense system. It was significantly undermanned and equipped with a mix of captured weapons from across Europe. Despite these limitations, despite being undersupplied, newly arrived, and outnumbered, the 352nd Division killed over 2,000 American soldiers. That a single, undermanned German division could inflict such devastating casualties reveals the strength of the defensive position the Allies had chosen. It also reveals why the Allies deliberately chose beaches with relatively lighter defenses. Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword were selected precisely because Omaha's hellscape had to be faced by someone, and the Americans bore that burden. The paratroopers tell another part of the story. Approximately 15% landed where they were supposed to. 85% scattered across the Norman countryside, many dropping into deliberately flooded areas where German forces had created a watery maze designed to trap invaders. This was a catastrophic coordination failure by any measure. Yet these scattered paratroopers, fighting in small groups across unfamiliar terrain, achieved their strategic objectives. They secured the exits from the beaches. They prevented German reinforcements from reaching the landing zones. They demonstrated that military success sometimes depends less on perfect execution than on soldier initiative, adaptability, and sheer determination. Overhead, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties on D-Day. The Allies flew approximately 15,000 sorties, a 30-to-1 ratio so overwhelming that German pilots barely contested the skies. Of the 113 Allied aircraft lost that day, not a single one fell to Luftwaffe combat. All were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire or operational accidents. The Germans had already lost control of the air. Without that air superiority, the invasion would have been impossible. German reinforcements could have arrived freely, German aircraft could have bombed the landing zones, the invasion would have failed. In the end, Operation Overlord succeeded because of a convergence of factors, a deception campaign so complete that German commanders watched the wrong horizon, an air superiority so total that the enemy couldn't contest the skies, a naval armada so vast that it seemed to darken the water, a logistical achievement so unprecedented that nearly 1 million troops were sustained across hostile beaches, and soldiers, American, British, Canadian, and from a dozen other nations, who adapted to chaos and achieved objectives despite coordination failures and horrific casualties. The impossible operation was impossible until it wasn't. On June 6, 1944, history turned on the decision of one man and the sacrifice of 550,200 souls. Europe's liberation began on a rainy morning when a general smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day said, "Okay, we'll go."